welcome back to this edition of Daily Actives brought to you by Bootleg Macro. I'm Dustin. We are looking at Tesla once again. Today, what we can see though is that just like we found out last Thursday and Friday, we have black lettering with a green background, which means that we are within a regular standard deviation of where we would expect the price to go. Now, if you watched any of my previous videos, I was very bullish on what was going on with Tesla, especially up into this drop. I'm still very bullish on it because what I'm noticing is that we are still getting volatility falling here. The one thing that has changed is that where the correlation is probably going, because we do see that the volatility is still falling, but I imagine that correlation is now rising to the volatility because we got a flip to price to fall since last Friday. Now, when I consider you get two signals in a row like that after a massive change, that's when I start to believe in it. So I now believe that it's priced to fall for the future path here of Tesla. Now, I'll be really interested because today seeing it up 3.48%, but still down over 7% over 5 days, that leads me to believe that we could definitely be in a situation where we are going to chop a little bit, but we're still not necessarily changing to a bear trend. Now, we can see that on the signal here on the short term, intermediate term, and longer term, we still do have a go long. And we do have a go short here in that short term. If there's anything that concerns me, it's going to be that today, of all days where I just said that this is still very bullish, it essentially flipped to show an all bearish look in the short term, intermediate term, and longer term. Now, I would again need to see two back-to-back bearish on the longer term to really believe it. But having two bearish on the short term and intermediate term back-to-back, those are the equivalent of equal to me when I think about the longer term. So I would be very cautious around what I see here in Tesla for the moment. Now, when I look at the overall sentiment, I am very, very much love to see that Tesla is now back around like 50%. It's at 50.9% for the ultra fast sentiment, which to me says a lot about where we've come from. And where we could go. And the reason is because when you see it's 50.9, you see in the previous weeks, in the middle of June here, when the price is essentially redlining higher, you were seeing the indicator essentially hit the very peak here was around 69, 70%. Now, I'm not saying that we're necessarily going to hit like the lows of like 35%, but I think 50% is like a nice place to start building a position to Tesla, in my opinion, for myself. Now, when I look at this chart, I'm not super convinced that we're going to see like worse days ahead. I do think that I would probably feel comfortable if I was just using levels as probably like a 240, 250 level, just as like general support. If it broke that, I'd probably want to like really review my position. But right now, I see a possible opportunity here in Tesla. Now, you do expect that it's going to kind of mean revert a little bit because you do see that we're coming off of a pretty high here, especially in the longer term, like weekly sentiment indicator. But when I look at the volume's starting to return. The price hasn't really dropped. The volatility, what's interesting here, though, is that the volatility has essentially, it started to drop, and I thought it was maybe plateauing at the end of last week. We're starting to rise again. Like you're almost going to have like a double hill. Instead of it having like a full hill where it's going to hit the bottom because this is zero bounded and go all the way back down to like 3 or even like 2.4 or like a 1.2. Like right now on the volatility scale, we're still at 16.2. But what's interesting now is that the correlation with price is starting to actually revert back up. So we would want to see volatility break out. Now, if volatility continues to fall and correlation continues to rise, that would be actually very negative for what we'd expect for the future path of Tesla, which makes a lot of sense when you start to think about what that future path says, where it says price to fall now after price to rise. It's because this volatility is still falling and the correlation is now rising. So what you'd actually like to see would be a complete resumption of volatility to the upside. You'd like to see some humongous, massive gap ups. Like if there's a huge catalyst right now, this would be a great time for it to work because the derivatives are telling you that if the catalyst doesn't arrive or if something doesn't make this change the direction in which it's going, you're more likely going to see 234 than you are necessarily going to see 305. Now, I'm not sure what to expect in the future. These are just indicators that I've built for myself, and I have a pretty good idea of how they work, but I do not have a perfect idea of exactly how they're going to like kind of shake out because you could get a massive like run up like you did here in January into February when you got that big essentially bottom inside the Tesla, and then it falls back down and then it just goes sideways for a while. But tell me what you think in the comments below. Are you long? Are you short? Do you like it? Do you love it? Is this even a good review? And before you go, subscribe to the New High newsletter. 25 stocks breaking out in your inbox on Sundays. Come on, get some.